Good afternoon. Welcome to the Georgia Museum of Art. I'm Catherine Hill, the Associate Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce you all to our esteemed visiting artist, Rachel Hayes, who has spent countless hours over the last few months, and in particular, this last week, preparing for her exhibition, Looking Through a Sewn Sky. Now, I won't give you too many details about Rachel, as she will share her background and her process with you throughout her talk. But I do want to give a brief introduction for how this exhibition came about. I came across Rachel's work several years ago and was enraptured with her dynamic use of color and composition. Her installations made places that felt mundane or overbearing feel light and energetic. It was two installations in particular at locations near and dear to my own heart that lingered with me for many years after. The Momentary, a contemporary art space in my hometown of Bentonville, Arkansas, and the Everson Museum of Art at Syracuse University, one of the first art museums I ever worked for. Both, shown behind me, had installations of Rachel's work. Rachel's colorful installations made me look and experience these two very familiar places very differently. The familiarity of them became complex and more nuanced with her works. I had never seen them before in the context that she was presenting them. It was with those experiences that lingered with me long enough that when we had the opportunity to reimagine the next phase of our sculpture garden, it was undeniable that Rachel's work could breathe in new perspectives of craft and painting, of installation and engagement, and articulate the garden to be an inviting place to linger, wonder, and lay witness to the beauty around us. Now, Rachel has a lot to share with us, so I don't want to take up any more time. Please hold any questions till the end of the talk, as we will take some time to open it up to you all. I hope many of you are already registered to join us following the artist talk for reception to honor Rachel Hayes, to celebrate our fall slate of exhibition openings, and join in community with the museum's friends, guests, and visitors. Without any further delays, please assist me in welcoming Rachel Hayes to the stage.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you all for coming. It really means the world for me to be here and share this installation in particular, and then I'm going to tell you how did I even get the idea to do something like that. And I'd have to start at the beginning, and that would be my first exhibition. Right after I graduated undergrad from the Kansas City Art Institute, from the fiber department. And I guess I was just trying to push the boundaries of what fiber could be. And I had the opportunity, one of my teachers who was in the painting department, who I invited to a critique, he invited me to show in the back room of a really great gallery in Kansas City. So that was my big break. And I was very interested in layering colors. I'd gone to New York with an art trip, and we went to the Fashion District, and I bought this vinyl, and I'd never seen material like that before. And I mean, you could get it at stores like Joann's, but I didn't know that. And so I was layering colors, colored vinyl on top of found fabrics that I got at the thrift store, and it was very much about found color theory. And art can be on the ground, and art can stretch around a wall, and it doesn't have to be traditionally placed on the wall and viewed like a painting. And then a couple years later, these are scanned slides, so they're not the best images, but I got to have a show in the main part of that gallery. And this is just lots of frosted vinyl with very rich colors interwoven in between it, and you could walk around it. I very much was inspired by Richard Serra and his giant walls and trying to think about something that large and looming, but in a different way. And then opposite from that was kind of like an color movement, and you know, coming from an environment where I could dye material to like not having access to, you know, the school facilities anymore, I guess I really leaned into what can I find color-wise, and mostly like at the thrift store and just like scraps from the fabric store. And I was cut pieces of wood and was wrapping fabric around the cut pieces of wood and then putting them back together. And these were some of like, when I was in undergrad, like, these were my visual bank of inspiration, which is Richard Serra and Christo and Olafur Eliasson and Gene Davis, who, and like the DC stripe painters, you know, were introduced to me. And then Polly Affelbaum and Jessica Stockholder. And Polly, you know, was putting velvet on the floor and calling it a painting. And I love the way that Jessica Stockholder would create a room size installation and then frame like a formal like arrangement within like a photograph, I guess. And long story short, I moved to New Mexico and then back to Kansas City because our friends in New Mexico, and this is all with my husband, Eric. We got married this year in 2004. They were encouraging us to go to graduate school. And so Eric and I, he's a painter, I'm not, and we applied to 7 different schools to get together, and I'll get to that. But this is my first time like visualizing like through very basic early Photoshop what I would do for this public art project in downtown Kansas City that had to be up all summer long. And it had you know, not a huge budget, but it allowed me to like buy my first industrial sewing machine. And this fabric is like the cheapest polyester I could get, but I needed lots of it. And there were wholesale fabric stores in Kansas City still. And my dad and basically everyone else I knew, Eric's dad, Eric's grandma's here, like my friends, my brother, helped me install this piece. But my dad, he also worked for an event company. And so there were some riggers on the crew that could help figure out how to do this. And that I also learned in that project that, you know, you put an idea out there and it becomes not about you, and everyone starts to get invested in it and wants to see it happen. And similar to what's happening now at this museum, it's just with all these great people that work at the museum, not my family, helping me do it. But this project was one of the first times I thought about it, fabric as stained glass. So that is another thing that I'll come back to. And just also photographing the beautiful things that can happen unexpectedly during an installation. Like I really didn't know, you know, the end product was really important to me, but then after that, all the photographs I had afterwards became like the crux, the most important thing. Even bringing that fabric home to my parents' house after a few months and dealing with it and cutting it up into smaller pieces and seeing it like laid out on grass. Or taking it up to South Dakota, where Eric's family's from, and laying it out there and seeing it in that landscape. So all of these things I was doing, and I used a lot of them to apply to graduate school with. And now this is in graduate school. And I ended up going to the painting department at Virginia Commonwealth University. And I walked into that building and immediately had the idea, and the painting chair was like, try it. And so it was a very supportive environment. And then just always collecting more things for my personal visual bank, which is, let's see, Le Corbusier, Andy Goldsworthy, Kente cloth, stained glass, Broadway boogie woogie, or who is this? I'm blanking. Yes, Mondrian, Gee's Bend, Tibetan prayer flags, Gee's Bend, Frank or Robert Morris, and beautiful dresses, Mexican dresses. Flamenco dancing, sorry. And then also putting ideas out there, applying for lots of things. And then sometimes getting them, but let's say that in between, after grad school, we moved to New York. So eventually we had Wyatt after a few years, but these, I was always still trying some things out. That's like my little porch, taking a piece to the park. Where can I share a studio? Going upstate New York and trying things at my friend's house. And then I was asked to do a project. This is in Lower Manhattan, and this is Louise Nevelson Plaza, which I thought was cool to make something for her plaza. But it also had to be functional, where the people that were doing construction had to be able to move these fences around. So I made 40 different pieces that would each fit on these fences, and it was an opportunity to make each one different with a limited color palette. But of course I didn't have space to do that in New York, so I did a lot of it in South Dakota. I brought my machine outside, and then that's Eric's mom helping me. And before driving it back to New York, we hung it up in my parents' backyard, and I have a lot of photos of this, but in particular, the reflection on the water is something that stuck with me. And I ended up, again, liking these pieces and photographs of just playing with the work more so than how it was meant to be viewed in Manhattan. So then, years later when we moved to New Mexico, back to New Mexico, I was familiar with this area. It's Bottomless Lake State Park, and this is called Mirror Lake. So I knew to do that, having seen it happen at my parents' lake in Missouri. Or not their lake, but the lake. Let's see. Now, I was trying to turn the sound back on just because I know. Oh, it is on. Okay. So the other thing is, Eric is on the left and my dad is on the right. My mom is holding Shay, who was probably 8 months there then. And Wyatt is over across the lake with me, running around taking photos. So it doesn't just happen. I saved this idea for when I knew my parents were going to come visit. Also at that time, or right around that time, I had done a project in Columbus, Georgia, which kind of starts to tie into my Georgia connection. My friend Hannah Israel, she teaches at the university there. And through another friend, we were introduced to each other, and she invited me to do this 2-week project on the Dillingham Bridge. And again, I had to like go to my parents' house to make it, because I had a tiny baby. My mom and I actually like took turns like holding Shay and like sewing this piece in her living room. But it was such a cool opportunity. So, you know, back to New Mexico, I'm getting all this work shipped back to me. And this is at the Roswell Artist in Residence program, which is kind of a near and dear place for Eric and I, because we've been there twice. We got married down there. We have a lot of friends down there. So when we moved from New York, we moved back here. It was kind of a nice landing ground. But having lived there before, White Sands is about 2 hours away, and I had just gotten all this work shipped back to me, and we're like, let's take it to White Sands. You know, a blank canvas to see it, because we couldn't quite see it on the scrubby ground, you know, around our place in Roswell. And that was, I would say, if my life was in chapters, like this was this beginning like of a new chapter, like seeing the work out there and just the massive scale difference. You think something is big and you put it out there, it's not big. Oh, okay, this is the story of this piece, which will lead to this museum. So this piece on the ground, right in the closest, in the foreground, I made when I was in Brooklyn and took it to the park. It was in a show. The picture on the right is it, you know, in a gallery, and then, but liking it better at the park. And then getting, you know, there was a Dumbo Arts Festival, and I was like, I got an idea for that. You know, having seen these things happening outside, and you just put the idea out there. It only had to last for 3 days. And so I just started making it bigger, taking that piece and adding onto it. And of course, I've had that Gee's Bin book for a long time. I got it in 2002 when it came out. So I've had a lot of time to think about it and, you know, to use what I had instead of going out. And that was very inspiring, especially with a little kid in New York City. And the idea of like taking a train and going and buying more fabric like was daunting to me personally. And I realized that I already had all the fabric I needed, so I'm just gonna keep adding on to this piece. And then taking it to New Mexico and having like a different experience with it, documenting, putting it out there in the world. I think I just joined Instagram and started sharing like some photos. And this was like, you know, one of the first ones. I joined it because living, you know, kind of in a very remote location after living in New York and wanting to stay connected with your friends. And it was a great way for me to share in like proof of life. Like I'm still making things, you know, out here. And then, you know, this is at Lamar, Dodd School of Art in the atrium. My brother had been living in Athens, and we're also friends with the professor, Ben Britton, and because he and Eric go way back from the painting world, and I was invited to be a visiting artist and create an installation, and kids are older, able to scoot around. That's the same piece. And then just putting it out there, and I get a DM from Angela Massoni, and that is an Italian fashion house. I knew who they were, and I was very excited and like, what? Like, would you want to collaborate? And I was like, absolutely. So that piece that I've been showing you is the one on the bottom, like this smallest one. And just through a back and forth of drawing things out, I think the image on the top left was like, well, we could do something like this. And then it turned, like the left side are my drawings. And then the right side are like, this is, actually, let's do this. And let's do it, you know, like in a month. And I was like, okay, because I couldn't say no. I was so excited. By then, I was living in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So, like, to have someone like that call you and not, you know, it just proves that you can be living anywhere, which I love. And my parents came to town again. They'd happened to be in town, and this was my studio at the Tulsa Artist Fellowship. That's what brought us to Tulsa, and helped me rip up the fabric. Because really, that's what takes so much time too, is like the preparing of the materials. And even like with the piece here outside, like the actual cutting down of these giant rolls of fabric is really laborious. And I still, so I have sewing machines at the studio, and then I always keep a sewing machine at home too, so that I can keep working and not be gone from home all the time. So this is it in Tulsa, getting ready to ship it to Milan. That's at the roof of the fellowship where my studio was, and then in my cul-de-sac. And then with, you know, we made it happen. So it was so exciting. And I think we got a video. We got to go to the fashion show. Hailey Bieber was in it before she was like huge. So that was pretty awesome. And to work with engineers and riggers to help figure out what these sizes needed to be. So back to New Mexico, like it was such a successful runway show, and going there and meeting everyone and, you know, having a personal relationship and them saying, I like this girl, and I'm going to dig a little bit further. I don't know. Angela started sending me all these photos from White Sands. And then I was like, what's going on? And she was like, well, we were going to have our ad campaign like filmed in LA, but now we want to do it, where did you take these photos? I was like, well, it's in, you know, Alamogordo, New Mexico, a very small town. And so they're like, okay. So my brother and I went, and we're like the art directors, like figuring out what to do with all the fabric. There's that place. And then I had to take a picture of Kevin when we were installing. I was like, wait, Kevin, stand up, do that again. I'm trying to turn the sculpture garden into like anybody's runway. Everyone. So, again, this is in Istanbul, the same piece on the left. So that obviously led to more opportunities. A lot of this was the same work that was out at White Sands. So I secretly want to be a music video director, like, if you can't tell. Now this is in Capri, Italy. It's still the same piece on the left. With the Istanbul 74 is the group that I've done on multiple projects with now. And these, I couldn't go to Capri, so these are all just screen grabs and like recordings from Instagram. You get the gist. Which leads us to Georgia, back to Georgia. But, okay, that piece in Capri blew up in a storm the likes no one had ever seen before. Like, no one knew there was a storm that was supposed to happen, but like, of course, a 90-mile wind storm came through, and literally, like, it's gone. Like, and so all that to say, it became very important, obviously, to realize how to make these experiences and these moments in time last, which meant like buying the right kind of material and, you know, having the chance to invest in like an even bigger industrial sewing machine. And so like these, you know, the pieces that are out here are made out of sunshade fabric, you know, 10 to 15 year lifespan. And I just have taken the technique that I use with the lighter weight material and use it with a heavier weight. And now it can last as long as it needs to. And I swear it could withstand a huge storm. It's the hardware that would fail, not the fabric. So I came to visit the museum, and like when I'm thinking about the complete experience of like walking through the front door, like what are you gonna see? And then, you know, coming up the stairs, what are you gonna see? And like being outside, looking back at the building, you know, just trying to like visualize the whole thing, looking at Google Maps from the top view, collecting inspiration from the collection for colors and also just lines. Let's see, here was my test. Manier Dawson on the left, unknown dress designer from the 20s. And then Albert Eugene Gallatin. I love those black slashes. And Elaine de Kooning, I love that palette, and the Sophie Tauber art. I love very graphic, minimalist. That's what I gravitate to. This Brockhurst painting, Woman in Aqua, we don't know who she is, but she's so beautiful. Like I feel like I fell in love with her, in her clothes and just like the idea of her. Because I love romance novels and I love heroines. Joan Mitchell, there's a lot of purple and yellow and dark turquoise kind of mixed into those pieces out there. And then the Sam Gilliam, he's got a triangle sewn in there. And, you know, the pops of red and light blue. And so I'm thinking about that. And then also the Frank Lloyd Wright window. Because every time you connect two pieces together of fabric, you get this seam. And it makes a line. So it reminds me of that line of stained glass. And then, you know, I go back to my studio, and I had to make a model because I was having a very hard time understanding the space, like, through just visuals. It really helps me. And then literally kind of mapping it out, how I would like for someone to walk through these pathways and to have balance and not like overpower everything. Oops. then it goes back to the museum, and Elizabeth helped mock up, take like my model, and I sent her pictures and videos and, you know, put it in the program. Like, how big are these things actually going to be? And like picking out the palette. And then the making of it. And this is my studio in the middle. And I really wanted to show you this because I know that when I'm making these things that they will come alive actually on site when there's light and space interacting with the colors. They just feel like it's like sleeping in my studio. And I had to make these one at a time and then just fold it up and move on to the next. And so there's, you know, then you can see like all the rolls of fabric in the background. It's just kind of a disaster space when I'm working. And I turn into like I look at these works and I just can't even get back to the headspace that I had to be in to make that. Like, it makes me feel a little like overwhelmed because I just kind of have to put my head down and get to work once all the planning is done, which is also the fun part, because then I get to, like, once I know the scale and sizes of these, then I get to have fun and with the color. And so here it is from outside and inside. I'm just showing you like some of this was Kate's favorite view, the little window in that piece. Briefly, I'll talk about the interior piece because it's very different. It's actually made very similarly, but different materials. And one of the materials is this light reflective, it's theater lighting gels. Comes in a million colors, just like fabric. Now you buy it in big rolls and cut it down. And, you know, I mean, I feel like, let's see, this was 2015. You know, I've been playing with these things for a long time and figure, you know, just the little bit of light can make that happen on the ground. And just trying different works out, not being satisfied. You know, I wasn't satisfied with how that looked. It was, so I cut it up and reimagined it and sew it back together. So there's the Tiffany window that's upstairs across from the piece that is inside. So there's an interior component up on the second floor. And I've done a lot of work thinking about windows, so these are examples of windows, how I think about windows. And this is on the second floor. So like, that's kind of the history of how I got to like making this type of work. Because it's like, you know, it's like being interested in jazz and rock and roll, or, you know, like crafts and, you know, fashion. So, of course, I don't do any of this alone. There's an amazing crew at this museum that helped take this project on. And I extend my utmost gratitude to helping this vision come to real life. And that's my Spotify playlist. So I've had a lot of people ask me, like, what do you listen to when you're working? And sometimes I listen to music, so there it is. A lot of times I listen to audiobooks once once I get to the fun part. And I think that's it. I mean, I could go on and on and on. I have more slides, but I feel like I don't even know what time it is. But I think it's time to wrap it up. See, it was like, so thank you so much. Oh, does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Things.
are you? Are they like soaking and drying, or is it running through a giant industrial washer? Is that something you even have to consider? Oh, I'm not considering it. Or, no, that's not true. I had a huge flood in my studio after a storm, and it became a race against time with the mold. And and I took multiple big pieces in, like, up to my parents. They live in Kansas City, like 4 hours away. We already had like this trip planned. So I brought a bunch of fabric and we were power washing it out in the yard, just trying to like salvage it. But usually this outdoor stuff I don't bother with. Like, you could power wash this, no problem. Like, but it's gonna be outside. Like, birds are gonna poop on it, and like trees are gonna drop stuff on it, and it's made to withstand that. So this type of work I don't worry too much about cleaning it. Some of the more silky things I have put in the wash, but it's really hardy stuff. I could spot clean it pretty easily. Yeah, yes. Blue. Well, the pieces like out here at the museum, they folded up like sleeping bags and came in a big box, like a few big boxes. And we just, you can manhandle it and smash it, kick it, like make it fit in that box. But then the interior piece, like, that's a different story. You don't want it to crinkle because it's like sewing, like with paper, that acetate will hold its creases. So we're laying out plastic and bubble wrap and laid the two pieces on top of each other and rolled it, and then put that roll and wrap that roll in bubble wrap, and then put that roll in another roll. So it's two very different ways. Sometimes I shrink wrap. The one that I did, the one that was on the bridges in Columbus, Georgia, they were huge and they packed down so small, and we drove our Prius and we showed up to that bridge to, the people from the city that are going to help, and they're like, where's the art? And like, it is, I promise you, it's here. It's going to look good. So I love that about my work versus like my husband makes giant paintings and we have to rent a truck to move his paintings. That's very, so early on I liked that about my work. Yes. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your talk, but I had a question. You mentioned crystal as inspiration, and I was just wondering, are you thinking about doing that kind of project of wrapping a building or wrapping a structure, and if so, which one would you do?
Well, I did do that one, let's see, the very beginning on that skywalk. I was 25 and I was like, well, I want to try that. I want to wrap a building, but it's going to be a glass building and it's going to be with sheer fabric so you can still see through it. So like he was definitely like an inspiration to know that is a possibility and you can call it art. But I was also thinking about like, organizing these bands of color into like something harmonious feeling. So I don't know if I'd do it again. If it was glass, yes. And actually there's a piece on the facade, a glass facade of the International Quilt Museum in Lincoln, Nebraska. And they have a beautiful glass building, and I made a piece out of the sunshade, and it's like on the facade of the building. So it's not quite wrapped, but it's definitely like having a conversation. Yes.
Hi, yes, thank you very much. Very beautiful work. I was struck by when you had the earlier videos with no music added, how the sound of nature blessing against it, and I'm thinking again how Christo did works out of nature that also partook of that. And I was wondering, have you thought, was that part of your intention to have that sound, which to me really adds to the work?
Yeah, sometimes there's people or dogs in the background. And, let's see, I've got a good.
But the wind blowing is kind of what I was talking about.
Oh, I might have taken it out. Oh, no, I didn't. Like this one. Hang on. Little play. When it, like you can hear barn swallows, like if you
Right,
really
right.
listen. And I love that. It's usually, I add the sound when I can't use what's there due to like construction.
Well, but I think that blowing of the wind
Yeah,
really adds to the power of those images.
yeah,
By hearing that fluttering and that power adds to then their forceful power of these rectilinear elements and colors imposing themselves on the landscape.
yeah. And I have a whole collection of experiences like that. There's one in White Sands which just like holding like on for dear life and the wind is roaring. I love that.
Yeah.
I think I got a little crazy with the reels, or like with the being able to add music and like thinking about like, you know, what fits, what kind of mood, what kind of vibe am I trying to project. I like that too, but when it works out with just right with the natural sounds, that's like probably, that's like, I mean, there's many times I've been in places like this all by myself, and it's just like so beautiful, like visually and just like the sounds.
I have another question,
Yeah.
and that has to do with your shapes. I notice they're all rectilinear. I'm thinking of Frank Stella and all these other people, but Ellsworth Kelly. But I was wondering if you were going to experiment at all, or if you have, with more organic shapes in your patterns.
I guess when there's bigger pieces of fabric or bigger pieces of color, like and it's blowing in the wind, it can become organic. I have had personally problems with sewing curves and making them like,
Oh, I'm sure that's very hard, yeah.
and being able to do the type of like strong seam that I need to do.
Right.
But also, like all of these pieces of they all, you'll notice there are no stripes, like exactly, because I think that the log cabin, which is kind of what I use, I start in the middle, which with each of these, even the triangles, it's called a log cabin pattern that I just like keep going instead of, so they all start in the middle and go round and round and round and round and round and round until it's the right size. And when you're pulling on it so intensely, it seems to like spread that tension around. Versus like when I've done it just like in stripes, then there's these weird bias things happen when you're pulling the tension. So I've kind of embraced that at least. I mean, I'm actually like working on a stripe piece in my studio right now. But
I do think there is a organic dynamic going on with your patterns. And as I said, with the flowing of the wind and all of that adds to that. I was just curious if you
it's
I
kind
hadn't
of
thought about sewing.
it's
That-
a practical way
Yeah.
to build something strong.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, it's really fun to think about how those colors are gonna look, you know, expanding in all those
Sure.
directions. And try to have some kind of like balance to it all.
How did you deal with the stress of like having a family, making sure you're taking care of them, and then suddenly all of your work is being sent off internationally, and then it just blows away?
Yeah. It's hard. I mean, well, with the kids thing, I have an amazing partner. And we don't live by family, but they're all still very involved. Like, if we needed anyone, help. But yeah, Eric is like super dad. Is, you know, sometimes I'll be really busy, like right now. You know, kids went back to school this week. And he's doing it all by himself, and that's stressful for him. And, you know, but he's got a show in a few weeks, and then I'll do that, you know. So, like, we have a very non-competitive relationship, which is awesome, and we both know what we're both trying to achieve, like, career-wise. And then the fabric blowing away and getting destroyed is like, that really sucks on multiple levels because now like I can't even have those scraps to like do something with or reuse for anything. But it also like people often ask, you know, for projects that can last outside. And I used to say yes to everything. I mean, I still do like to say yes to most things, but like now, in order to make it last, like you have to really buy the right material. That's my lesson that I've learned. I'm tired of just shipping things out and like, no, you know, they're just shipping up, like sending them to their death, basically. So, I mean, also like that piece had a lot of life that it went through, and it's okay that, you know, it was a big lesson. I don't need it anymore. I don't want it back. It's just gonna be in a box under my table.
Do you have a personal favorite piece, and if so, why is it your favorite?
Usually the last thing is my favorite. I love the piece that's inside. I mean, my personal favorite of the ones outside would probably be the big one that's this one on the, because I made some color choices that I was unsure of, and I really like how they turned out. And it was mostly like in response to some of the pieces in the collection to add like those weird turquoise and blues, one after another, where I normally wouldn't do that. And my craftsmanship on that one is top notch, you know, like, and it just, I really love how it fits in that space. I love, actually, it's not up, but if you're standing back there and looking back at the building, the piece right there on the building is like right in between those, and the other one is right there. And so it just worked out so like beautifully, like the placement. And then the inside piece, like it just looks really beautiful for one, and it installed perfectly. So some of the stress of what I do is like I get the measurements and then try as I might to make them correct. And that's hard when it's not a natural thing for me. I don't like making clothes, you know, and following patterns. Like exact sewing is not fun. So, but the reward is when it fits and it looks great and perfect, and it's very like, you know, I feel like, oh, you know, very proud. Yeah.
I have a question about when you mentioned like, I don't know how you get back into that headspace where you were when you made something, just the scale of these. Are you able to sort of keep the image of the final product in your mind as you're sewing, or does it sort of become so single-minded and then just like trusting your earlier self that the plan is gonna work?
I think it's both. Like, I trust that the plan is gonna work because I've thought about it from all the angles. And then I do not remember and retain numbers or, other like facts. But I can visualize something and then make it. And so yeah, to get back into that headspace, it was intense because of the making is so intense and laborious, and I just feel like I'm kind of plowing through it, and also keeping all of this track in my head somehow, but knowing that, trusting that it'll work because it's gone through my filter, their filter, the engineer, like the designer, like everyone's like, all right, let's make this work, and like, okay. There's nothing to do now but try.
I was wondering, you're talking about, you just mentioned the engineer, and I was wondering, like, do you work with different riggers still, like, at different sites, or do you have somebody who knows your work and who do you use one person to figure out how to hang it, or is there just go to the site and find the guy or girl who's, knows this building or that building?
Well, usually in a situation like this, there's people to help figure those things out. And I don't like to do this. I don't have an engineer that I work with all the time. Usually everyone has someone, I'm working on a project right now, and had to go through the city engineer. And I like that, because then they will deem it safe.
Right.
Yeah, and then, my husband and my brother it depends on the situation. Like here, there's a preparator team, and there's the facilities, that team, they are basically riggers. They know how to do the cabling and everything. And when that is not available, like this one I'm getting ready to work on, we had the engineer, but I'm hiring the rigging crew, which is my brother Garrett, my husband Eric, and then another guy, and then two other guys. But it's different every time. Okay, Kate's getting
Okay. Thank you, guys. This is time. I want to thank you all for coming and spending the afternoon with Rachel and the team here. If you've pre-registered for the artist reception and friends celebration, but still need to get your wristband, please see Michelle just out these doors. This exhibition is going to be up for 2 years, so we get a lot of time to live with it, to see it through the different seasons. So I do hope you come back at another time. The museum is closing a little bit early today, but again, we're kind of open Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, not Monday. And we're open late on Thursdays, so you can enjoy the works here. And yeah, thank you all for joining us today.